Most people live by the same feelings every single day, and they've, in a sense, lost their free will to a program. Every time we think about that trauma, we're producing the same chemistry in the brain and body as if it was happening again. If you can't overcome that emotion, then you can't create anything new because that emotion is keeping you tacked to the past. You teach them how to find the present moment and managing their attention, managing their energy, and you are literally training an animal that has really poor manners. And when that happens, boom, there's this liberation of energy.
I was just wondering how you try to teach your ideas to a younger audience.
Children that we invest in, I mean, those are the seeds of our future. They're going to resolve the problems that we've created. And now I understand the importance of parenting. We have to support them balancing technology with social engagement.
Is that a big problem you're seeing, or is that just something that we assume as parents or older people, that kids are addicted to their phones?
Oh no, it is an absolute problem. Say a gaming situation example, you blow someone up, you shoot someone, you beat somebody up, you break through another level. There's a tremendous release of dopamine in the brain. Dopamine is the pleasure chemical. In the absence of that stimulation, they can't find pleasure from anything.
So it's important in this age of connectivity to know how to unplug, get back in touch with yourself, focus on these emotions.
Retreat from your life. Do something in nature. Go from a narrow focus to a broad focus. This is a real small wink in how long this is going to go, so why not go all in?
The world is changing. Inspiration is everywhere. It has never been so easy to connect, share, and bring people together. We're learning from others and finding the best in ourselves. Challenging our beliefs. Sharing our vulnerability. Overcoming our fears. Transforming ourselves so we can transform the world. How far can we go?
This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is... To change your personality, you have to change your personal reality. And these are the kind of things that Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about. And he explains that every day we have 60 to 70,000 thoughts. But the problem is that 90% of them are the same as the previous day. And we've got to find a way to stop ourselves in the morning and start visualizing a new reality. And by doing that, we can visualize a brand new evolution, and that's going to affect not only our mental space, but our physical space. And these are fundamental ideas that I love talking to Joe Dispenza about. This is the third time we've had him on London Real, and he really shows me that it is all in your mind, and you've got to disrupt this negative pattern that many of us are in, that's rooted in our past story, and our past history. So we go into that. We also talk about trauma. We also talk about Joe's personal story, and even some details when it comes to parenting. So I know you're going to love this show. This is London Real. I am Brian Rose. My guest today is Dr. Joe Dispenza, the New York Times bestselling author, international lecturer, researcher, and educator. Your work focuses on the intersection of neuroscience, epigenetics, and quantum physics, driven by the conviction that each of us has the potential for greatness. You specialize in teaching people to rewire their brains and recondition their bodies to make lasting changes. Dr. Joe, welcome back to London Real.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm always happy to be with you.
I love having you here, and you've been here now 3 times in 2 years, which I think is more than any other guest on our show. And we have you back because people want to hear your message. And, you know, YouTube doesn't lie. You know, it shows what the people want. And I was wondering if you could wrap your head around that, why people are almost craving for your message. Is it because maybe they haven't found those answers in science and school and the medical profession? What do you think that is?
Well, I honestly think that we're in an age of information. And in an age of information, ignorance is a choice. And because of technology, we have access to information that was once only left to the hands of authorities, whether you were a teacher, a priest, a rabbi, a doctor, that there was a kind of a separation, that knowledge was always kept from the masses, and technology has kind of closed that gap. So everybody's informed right now. You can get answers to just about anything at your fingertips, and with the gaining of information, with the gaining of knowledge, there's a change in awareness. And awareness is consciousness, and you can't have consciousness without energy. So there's this very strong fundamental change in the energy of the way people begin to interact in their environment and in the world. So what was once considered novel just 5 years ago is old information to this day. And now, because more things are happening in a shorter amount of time because of technology, everybody's gaining information quite rapidly, and because of that, paradigms, whether it's the economy, political, journalistic, whether it's the religious model, the medical model, the environment, education, it's all beginning to come apart because that old model can't sustain itself in the changing times. So I think people right now, because they're so informed, are beginning to realize it's not enough to just know, that this is a time in history to know how. So rewind the tape 15 years ago, me standing in front of an audience, people love the information, but to get them to actually do something with it, there was this kind of general resistance to doing something with it. Well, now people want to give their time to instruction, to learn how to apply it, to learn how to take that philosophical, theoretical, scientific knowledge and personalize it, to demonstrate it, to initiate it in some way, to modify their behaviors and do something differently. And getting them to get their behaviors to match their intentions creates a new experience. And experience then is one of the things that enriches circuitry in the brain. It literally changes. I mean, learning is making connections, but experience is enriching those connections. And the side effect of a change in the circuitry in the brain when in the midst of an experience, that we begin to feel an emotion. And the emotion is the payoff from the experience. When you feel unlimited, when you feel gratitude, when you feel whole, when you feel in love with life, now you're teaching your body chemically to understand what your mind has intellectually understood. Now you're embodying the truth of that knowledge. The knowledge is actually making it into your genes. It's making it into your cells. And,
right. Without that emotion, that won't happen.
It's sterile. It's
right. It's like a computer program without it.
Yeah. So if you give people numerous opportunities to connect, if you give them numerous opportunities to get beyond themselves, if you apply the science in a way that they can understand it and repeat it, they're beginning to install the circuitry in their brain in preparation for the experience. And the more they understand what they're doing and why, the how gets easier. So if you've done it once and you can understand how you did it and you can reproduce it over time, you will neurochemically condition your mind and body to begin to work as one. In other words, your body will now know how to do it as well as your mind. Now, at that point, you're beginning to master that philosophy. It's becoming a state of being. So I watch people go from a philosopher to initiate to master. I watch people go from knowledge to experience to wisdom. I witness people to go from mind to body to soul, to thinking to doing to being, to learning it with their head, applying it with their hands, and knowing it by heart. And what's happening now is that there's a very profound interest in evidence. And so we've done extensive measurements, as we've talked about in past shows, to prove.
And science is important to you. It's not important to a lot of people out there, but for you, it was always the glue that really brings this together between the logical brain and the emotional brain.
Well, I think it's a few reasons, and I'll speak very candidly. I think that science is the contemporary language of mysticism. When you start talking tradition or culture or religion, you divide an audience, but science creates community, right? Because that's the contemporary language and understanding when you combine quantum physics with neuroscience and neuroendocrinology and psychoneuroimmunology and epigenetics. All of the science points the finger at possibility. So that's one reason, because I don't want people to be intimidated, because what science shows is factual, right? So they're more likely to believe in that. And the moment you use a word from some tradition or some religion or for some sect or culture, some people shut off. They don't know what that word means. And
God
it has
is one.
God, whatever, that they have a stigma about it that really limits their participation because of their past experience, because of their beliefs.
Okay.
So I try to keep it as pure as possible. And the other thing is I think that the male brain tends to be more logical in that way. So we have a lot of men in our audience, and for me to get men to the edge a lot of times, they have to methodically understand. Women somehow intuitively know this, and they just trust a whole lot more. So men have to be led to the edge a lot of times, but that doesn't mean that women don't appreciate the science, because I think they do. I just think men need it to bridge the gap, right? So to me, we've done extensive brain scans. I now know people can change their brain in 1 hour. I've seen it. I know what a mystical experience looks like in the brain. I know how to induce it because we've studied it so much. I know when a person is in the midst of change, we can predict when it's happening. I know that people can begin to regulate emotional states and sustain them, that it can become a skill. We've seen gene changes in 4 days. We've seen immune regulation changes. We've seen telomere changes in 4 days and 60 days. That means you're lengthening your life.
And how do you measure the gene changes in 4 days?
So we did a randomized study with a group of people to measure 7,500 different gene regulations. And genes are like Christmas tree lights. They turn on and off all the time. When they regulate in a positive direction, or when they're stimulated properly, they upregulate and they make healthy proteins. And genes make proteins, and proteins are responsible for the structure and function of your body. And the expression of proteins is the expression of life.
Is this epigenetics when they kind of turn on, or you can get them to turn on?
Yeah, it's the environment outside the cell. It's the information that's instructing and selecting the gene from outside the cell. Then if the information coming from the cell, say example is a stress hormone, the cell closes down and it downregulates, and it starts making a cheaper protein, or it doesn't make the expression of proteins properly. So my interest was, okay, we now know that genes do not create disease. Less than 2% of the people on the planet are born with type 1 diabetes or sickle cell anemia or Tay-Sachs disease. The other 99 to 98% is created by lifestyle. You can get two identical twins with the same genome. Why does one die at 57, the other one die at 85? Well, different environment, different perception of the environment, different behaviors, different choices. So then I wanted to see if people began to think differently, make different choices, do different things, create some new experiences, and feel and embrace different emotions. If that was new information coming into their nervous system, into the circulatory system, into their body, could we change the gene expression? Because we've witnessed people heal from cancer, and in a week we've seen people with MS heal in a few days. We've seen people with Hashimoto's syndrome change, rare genetic disorders change. We've seen all kinds of things change. But you just can't leave it up to, oh, that just changed. You have to close the gap between knowledge and experience. So the gene expression would be the piece that would say, wow, there were some changes. So all we wanted them to do is to do those specific things of thoughts, choices, behaviors, experiences, and emotions. And the other thing is that most people live by the same feelings every single day. People wake up in the morning, and your brain is a record of the past, so you wake up and you start thinking about your problems, and your problems are connected to certain people and things at certain times and places. The moment you start activating those circuits of memories related to the past experience and the environment, you're thinking in the past. Because every person, every thing, every place has a neurological network in your brain because you've experienced it. The end product of an experience is an emotion, so when you start thinking about your problems, you start feeling the emotions associated with them. You start feeling unhappy. So your thoughts are the vocabulary of your brain, your feelings are the vocabulary of your body. How you think and feel creates your state of being. So most people start their day, every single day, reaffirming their entire state of being in the familiar past.
Right.
Then they rush to the predictable future, right?
And this is probably 99.99% of humans in the world wake up.
In doing that in unconscious and habitually. So then they go through the same routine behaviors that they've been doing for the last 5 years. in their habitat is reinforcing their habits, and they're going through a series of unconscious choices, behaviors, experiences, and emotions. And they do that for 10 years. They're on autopilot, and their body's dragging them into a predictable future based on what they did in the past, and they've, in a sense, lost their free will to a program, right? And their body's dragging them into that genetic destiny.
How do we ever evolve if this is our default as humans? You know, do you ever wonder
crisis, trauma, disease, diagnosis, betrayal wakes people up from the program, right?
Okay.
So I assert if you're not in the present moment, you're running a program. So if a person's living by guilt and they don't know it's guilt because it just feels like they've been feeling that way every single day or suffering, and those emotions are driving their thoughts, and if they can't think greater than how they feel, and feelings and emotions are a record of the past or thinking in the past. Now, if you believe that your thoughts have something to do with your destiny,
which most people do agree.
Well, yeah, so then your past is going to be your future.
Right.
We can, in fact, there's no magic there. You're going to lift your past up and set it on your future, and it's going to be a predictable life for most people, right?
But most people want to break that.
Of course, they don't understand the formula, they don't understand the technology. So then the emotion drives the thought. The thought turns on the same circuits in the brain, produces the same neuropeptides that signal the same hormonal centers. You feel the same way. If you think you're a failure, you feel like a failure. Once you feel like a failure, you think you're more of a failure. And people get caught in these loops. Well,
sometimes I'm caught in one of those loops and I'm like, I've been hanging out with Dr. Joe and I know I can outthink myself out of this, but sometimes I'm like, I'm angry. I know my anger is giving me a worse destiny, but I can't get out of the anger loop.
Well, just think about it. If you think you can't stop something, then you're a junkie, right? I mean, you're addicted on some level. You're conditioned, right?
Right. Even though it's a bad emotion, you can still be addicted to that. Of course,
but the rush of those stress hormones creates an arousal, and so then people really think that they can't control that. So the redundancy of that cycle over time, your body is believing it's in the same environmental experience 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because the body doesn't know the difference between the real experience that's creating the emotion and the emotion that you're creating by thought alone. The body's believing it's in that environmental condition, so you're hitting the same gene. You're signaling the same gene in the same way, and you're making the same protein. And if it's derived from anything like anger or frustration or fear or impatience, the long-term effects of those chemicals begin to downregulate genes and create disease. And so people now get their genetic buttons pushed. So then, okay, what if we can break that cycle in our event and teach people how to elevate their emotional state and have those emotions drive new thoughts and think that way, sit in their meditations, stand in their meditations, walk in their meditations, be calm, lay down in all the ways we possibly can, retreat from your life and remove the environment and work on you and changing your inner world to see if it's going to produce an out-picturing in your outer world. So we measured 7,500 gene expressions, and we wanted to see the common genes of those 35 or 40 individuals that they were expressing. Now, they all had their own gene expression, but what were the common ones that they expressed? There were two genes that were expressed that literally downregulate cancer genes, that reduce cancer and tumors and growth. A gene that grows new neurons in your brain, not just new connections, but the growth of new neurons in response to novel experiences and learning. Genes that stimulate stem cells, that go to damaged tissues and repair them, to repair damaged tissues, regeneration. The gene for oxidative stress was downregulated, which means anti-cancer, anti-aging, anti-heart disease, anti-stroke, anti-inflammatory, anti-neurodegenerative, antimicrobial. This is what the antioxidant does. Genes that regulate the immune system to become stronger. Genes that stimulate the microtubules in the cells, the cellular structure, the integrity of the cells were getting stronger. So we now know that in 4 days, people were regulating genes for even their pituitary working better. So we are our own genetic engineers, and when we begin to understand that if the environment signals the gene, and the end product of an experience in the environment is an emotion, when you embrace an emotion ahead of the actual experience in your environment, you're signaling the gene ahead of the environment. And your gene begins to change your protein expression, which means you literally become the very person you want to be.
Okay. Now, how can you do that? How do you front run your emotions that way?
Well, it's just a formula. You have to learn how to make those internal changes. And after all the research, Brian, one of the things we realize is that there's a formula that we've actually been able to replicate that creates significant changes in brain coherence, your brain working better. In one study we did, we found out that 80% of our participants had a more than 90% change in their brain for the better in 4 days, to create more heart coherence so that you can self-regulate your emotional state independent of what's going on in your outer environment. And so we've kind of narrowed it down to a formula. So the evidence that we're seeing in our scientific measurements sits on this side. And it's objective. It's not just subjective. You saying, oh, I feel better at the end of the event. No, well, we have science to prove that it's not just in your mind. It's in your brain. It's not just in your mind. It's in your body, right? And then there's this other arena that's starting to unfold that's actually surprising me on a daily basis, and I'm so changed because of it, because in our week-long events we're witnessing miracles of biblical proportion, and I'm talking about blind people seeing, deaf people hearing, tumors shrinking, MS, huge changes, people with crutches and walkers are walking without them. I mean, we're seeing very significant changes taking place. And so...
And how can you explain that stuff?
Well, here's what I know.
And why now and not for you 10, 15 years ago?
Because it's the 4-minute mile. So we now know if we give people numerous opportunities to connect, we give them a good model for them to wrap their mind around, and we give them an opportunity to overcome themselves, that as the week goes on, more and more people start hooking in. They start getting it. And all of a sudden, we have the first person stand up and say, hey, I know no one's going to believe this, but I've had MS for 21 years. I've been walking with crutches. I have not been able to feel my chest, my arms, my lips, my face. I've been struggling with motor function, sensory function. I haven't been seeing very well. And I don't know what happened after that meditation, but I felt a level of love I've never felt in my entire life. Now remember, the emotion is signaling the gene before they're ever in the environment. They're not waiting for the healing to feel the love for life. The love for life is actually creating the healing, right? So how you then get past that point and teach people how to do that. So now...
But you're breaking patterns that they could never break on their own.
Well, we're moving a community of 1,000 people or 1,200 people from one state of mind and body to the other.
Right, so collective energy.
Collective energy.
Taking them to places they would normally never be.
Taking them further than they normally would go, because on the other side of their fear is courage. On the other side of their pain is freedom.
So fear would pull them back a lot of times if they tried to do this
Once
themselves.
they get to that uncomfortable feeling, they get to the edge, they stop. But if you can explain where that edge is and what that discomfort is, they're venturing to go. And then there's a disentangling of the programs for a day where people are in chaos, and you can measure brain activity, and there's dissonance, and the whole brain is in disorder, and that's when they want to quit.
Right.
But if they go one more time and they apply the formula, you see this massive reorganization take place, and all of a sudden, you know, they're smiling. Now, the side effect of that, when that person with MS stands on the stage in front of 1,200 people and says, I got to tell you my story, and they tell you their story, and it's a real person. They don't look like a movie star, and it's not a Hollywood version, and they're not buffed and slender and look like a vegetarian or whatever. They're just a common person, and you can relate with them. And I'm standing out looking in the audience, and I'm watching people well up with tears. They're witnessing a miracle, a transformation. You can't go back to business as usual. You can't go back to being the same person because you know so much. So then, whether it's a psychiatrist that has Parkinson's disease that did everything to take care of it, the next thing you know, he's standing on the stage saying, look, no tremors in this hand, I'm a psychiatrist, something's happening to me, I'm going to keep going here. They're starting to believe in their future more than they're believing in their past. They tell that story, and people are listening to that story. The beauty behind it is they begin to relate with them, and it's like a 4-minute mile. Boom, you break that veneer, you pierce that level of consciousness, you break that level of awareness. And then as soon as the 4-minute mile was broken, 2 weeks later, the next person broke it, and then all of a sudden everybody started doing it. Well, it's the same collective consciousness that's happening. There's a footprint in consciousness in the field that people can step into.
In that room, or do you think around the world?
In the world, but more readily accessible in that room. Why? Because people are immersed in the environment. They're understanding the content. They're in the process of change themselves. That person now has just created a footprint for them to step into. And that person will be 72 years old. And here you are, you know, a 45-year-old person just going, oh, if they can do it, I can do it. That's all we need, right? So the evidence then that people are witnessing in the room not only is a footprint in consciousness, but by the same means, it becomes something that they can associate in 3D reality with their senses. They're witnessing it, but they're not watching it on YouTube. There's 4 more days of the event left. And then all of a sudden the next person gets up there with Raynaud's syndrome, who has, you know, a vascular change in their hands, and they're swollen all the time.
That's more and more evidence of this.
And then we have another, she tells a story, and another person with Raynaud's the next day stands up and said, my Raynaud's gone. And then another person with Raynaud's, and then a person who's allergic to everything was wearing a mask.
Okay.
All of a sudden they start changing. So then what you start seeing is this collective movement, right? And so the evidence is the loudest voice.
Okay.
And it's louder than any other voice right now.
And to summarize what you're saying, say 10 or 15 years ago, people would come for the philosophy, for the knowledge, and they would sit there and say, okay, that sounds interesting, I'm going to go back to my life and do that. These days, people, probably thanks to technology and YouTube and already knowing a lot of your ideas, they come, first of all, they go on YouTube seeking the knowledge to change, and then when they come to see you in live, they're like, I'm ready to go here.
Well, what I do know is that 15 years ago, people would go and listen to it, me, and then shelve it. They didn't really participate in it because the first 15 years ago, the effects that we were producing was very minimal.
Right.
But there's a brush fire now. So when you come to, say, my week long, we're starting at 6 in the morning and we got to go. And we're finishing at 7 at night, and you're immersed.
Right.
And I'm pushing you right into your future, right? And I'm going to give you opportunities over and over again to say, what did I learn from the last meditation? What did I do well?
Right.
If I had another chance, what would I do better?
And everyone's more mentally prepared.
And you're talking to the person next to you, and you're struggling, and they say, my God, I was trying so hard yesterday, and I just let go, and I had the most incredible experience of my life. And you're looking, going, I was about ready to quit. No, that's what was going to happen to me yesterday. So community all of a sudden becomes this collective energy of connection where people are all moving in the same direction, just like those flocks of birds in Brighton, you know, those starlings, or the fish that are moving all. You start getting this one mind, this one heart, this collective movement, and there's power, such power in that.
For the people that that this is making a lot of sense to, but they're still stuck in this daily routine, and logically this all makes sense. How do you get people to like make that first step where they can maybe have that one day or that 1 hour where they're like, wow, I actually just took everything Dr. Joe said and I see a little bit of evidence. Maybe I can now take the next step and the next step.
Yeah.
Because again, the other day I was trapped in my own little anger cycle, and I've got all the knowledge in the world and some great experience with you, and I couldn't think my way out of it.
Yeah. If you can't think greater than how you feel, we've studied the brain scans of people who are thinking in a meditation within some disturbing emotion. And 100% of the time, Brian, they make their brain worse. They are driving it further into higher beta brainwave patterns because, first of all, the arousal of the stress hormones is causing you to become overly analytical, and analysis isn't going to do it. Even the insight from analysis isn't going to change it. Right. And then secondly, the emotion is a record of the past, so you're thinking in the past. The solution is getting beyond it. So breaking that cycle is shortening the refractory period of those emotional reactions is the gift, right? And I don't care that you react. The question is, how long are you going to react, right? That's the fundamental question. So it's trial and error. It's trial and error. And if you get enough people beginning to figure out this formula, as an example, we have Bond University on the Gold Coast in Australia, the only privately funded university in all of Australia that is analyzing a lot of our brain research data. And the first thing the researcher said to me was, we have never, in all the studies we've done, we've never seen people be able to change their brainwaves as quickly and as efficiently as this particular group. The scale is off the chart. So we now know that people are doing it, right? We know that they're doing it. So then my interest is, once I know that they know how to apply that formula, let's see what they can do by applying the formula to the next level. Giving them the understanding the science, build a model, and then let's put them in a situation to see then if they can master that next level. And by doing a very similar thing, but by just advancing the understanding and doing something extra. And what would the outcome would be? And as an example, wow, I healed myself of stage 4 cancer. Okay, well, if I heal myself, is it possible to heal someone else? That's a good question. And what would be the science to do that? So we've set up these opportunities for people to really practice creating a coherent field of energy in a person that's sick. And we have seen dramatic, and I mean dramatic, changes in people's health instantaneously. Because it's not matter that emits a field when you study the science, it's the field that creates matter. If you change the field, you're going to change matter. And that just takes a change in belief, because most people think they need to change the matter, they need to change the tumor. It's not your job to change the tumor. That's matter to matter. You have to change the pattern or the information in the field.
Okay, and when I'm stuck in my anger loop, I need to use another emotion to get myself out of that. Not the analytical thinking.
Well, just ask yourself this question.
Yeah.
Who is that anger hurting?
Yeah, me and everyone around me.
Yeah, so first your body, right?
Right.
Because there's some toxicity in the long term effect. Short term, it's fine. But if you're caught in the rush of anger over and over again, well, you're down-regulating the gene, right? And if you're thinking about the problem, check this out. You're thinking about the problem and it's creating the response of anger. You're conditioning your body to become the mind of anger. In other words, conditioning just takes a thought or an image and a feeling or an emotion. So every time you do that, you're conditioning your body to become more dependent on anger. So then if that anger downregulates genes and creates disease long term, and you're turning on that stress response just by thought alone, then your thoughts are going to make you sick.
Yeah, I agree, it's bad.
Yeah, it's bad. So then once you, so what you have to do is you have to remember. Now, that means then you would have to apply some type of exercise or some type of skill to stop, close your eyes, work on your breathing, elevate your emotional state. Remember the feelings of your future instead of the feelings of your past. In other words, if you're creating a wonderful future and you feel the emotions of that future and you feel like you're connected to the energy of your future, the moment you get angry and frustrated, you just disconnected from the energy of your future, and now you're back to the energy of your past, and don't expect anything to change. But that's okay. It's not a bad thing. We're human, right? But you take a moment and say, what's more important, this or my future? Okay, give me a minute. It's going to take me a little bit. It may take me an hour to get past the chemicals, but let's go. And so people are starting to do that more and more, and the reality that they're perceiving is incidental now compared to what they're creating in their future. So they're reacting less to their environment, and they're investing more of their attention and energy into a new future.
So it's all about that future, and yet most of us live our lives in the past, and everything is based on the past, and we're all triggered on these past pieces.
Sure. I think the best way to say it is, if you're not defined by a vision of the future, you're left with the memories of the past. And people literally believe in their past more than they believe in their future. That's why they talk about their past more than they talk about their future. People romance their past and more in love with their past than they are in love with the future. And people who actually create amazing things in their life just were more in love with their future, and they kept it alive in their mind every day. And they, like feeding a plant or a garden, they're tending to that future every single day, and the delight that comes with it, and the excitement that comes with it, and the emotions that come with it, cause them to literally change their brain and body over time to begin to look like the future has already happened. Now think about that. If there's evidence in your brain and body by thought alone, evidence that looks like you've already experienced your future, what does that mean? It's already happened. So relax, because it's going to find you, and it's going to come in a way that you least expect. That's the beauty behind this. If you could predict it, it's nothing new. It's got to surprise you. The brain learns by mistakes and surprises. So why not be surprised by an unknown coincidence or opportunity or synchronicity? And the moment you notice what you did inside of you that produced that effect outside of you, you're going to pay attention to what you did and you're going to do it again, and you're going to believe less that you are the victim of your life. You know, someone or something is controlling your feelings and thoughts. So all of a sudden realizing your feelings and thoughts begin to create an outcome in your life. I think that experience then causes a human being to feel empowered. They start to believe in themselves more. And I think when we believe in ourselves, I think we believe in possibility. And when we believe in possibilities, I think we really believe in ourselves. And in getting people to that point, to realize that nobody's excluded from this. You can't tell me any longer that you're too old to do this. We have brain scans of people in their 80s that will blow your mind, and they could be watching.
You can always focus on a future of yours. And by doing that, you can start healing yourself in all ways.
You can't tell me you're too sick to do this work. I've seen super sick people with 50 brain tumors turn their life around. They have no brain tumors, 50 brain tumors.
Okay, the future.
You can't tell me that you had a turbulent past and you can't do this work. I've seen people that had the most abusive past. They're the happiest people in the world. Okay. You can't even tell me that you've never meditated before, because many times the people who have never meditated have the most profound experience because they're not expecting anything. You can't tell me you're too overweight, you're too underweight. You can't tell me any of that. You can't tell me you're too this or too that. I've seen it in all shapes, all sizes, all colors, all ages.
You mentioned the abusive past. And I would love it if we could talk a little bit about trauma today.
Sure.
I also love it if we talk a little bit about parenting, and then maybe hear a little bit of your story as well as you grew up. I recently had 3 guests that were on the show that had some trauma in their life. I had Lewis Howes last week. I know you've been on his show, and he's kind of been talking more about sexual assault he had when he was 5 years old, and about how talking about it has really opened up a lot of things. I had Rose McGowan here a couple weeks ago, who has kind of started the Me Too movement and really opened up a lot of about sexual harassment in the industry. I had Shannon Briggs here yesterday, 2-time heavyweight champion, who at 13 years old was evicted from his house. He was homeless after that, led to his mother being addicted to drugs, and he took all that trauma and ended up kind of turning it into violence, and each of these people experience trauma, and I'm wondering, when you see people go through trauma, Joe, do you see sometimes that some of that is passed through DNA, through culture, and then how do you end up, because you must have a whole room full of people with different traumas, physical, emotional. How do you look at that phenomenon, and how do you get people talking about that?
Well, the stronger the emotion that we feel from some external event in our life, the more altered we feel inside of us as a result of that condition outside of us, the more we pay attention to the cause. And the brain narrows its focus on whatever it is that's sitting there, and it freezes an image and it takes a snapshot. And that's called a memory. So the higher the emotional quotient, the more fear, the more pain, the more shock, the more anger, whatever it is, the more we pay attention to the cause. And so then we create long-term memories that way. Now the challenge is that every time we think about that trauma, we're producing the same chemistry in the brain and body as if it was happening again. So some people, after an event like that, are literally re-experiencing it 100 times in one day. And this is a crazy thing, because what it does is it activates the survival gene. And when you're in survival, what you want to do is make sure that that doesn't happen again. So what you start to do unconsciously is you start to begin to forecast what you'll do if it happens again, right? And you start selecting a worst case scenario in your mind. And then you think, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? And you start to even make it even more, you get more creative, right? And every time you do that, you start experiencing the emotion of that future based on the pain of your past, the fear of your past, the anxiety of your past, the depression of your past. And so the person's conditioning their brain and body into the past, and at the same time, they're literally bracing themselves for the worst case scenario in their life, because in survival, if you prepare for the worst, there's better chances of survival. And you could have 10 really great things go on in your life, and you could have one bad thing, and you keep focusing on that one bad thing because you got to be prepared for it happening again. So people unconsciously then spend their whole life looking around the corner, waiting for it to occur, and they're on guard. Now, that's not a conscious process.
Common in PTSD from soldiers. They're constantly looking for the roadside bombs, and they're highly elevated, and it's it's unconscious a lot of times.
What they're doing is when you're in that brainwave state, you're sweeping your environment to determine if there's anything out of order. And you're doing that because the brain is on such an aroused state. In survival and stress, the brain is in a very alert state, and the brainwave patterns are high beta. You're super aroused, you're super alert, because you're vigilant about one thing out of pattern that looks unusual or unrecognizable. And the moment you see that, it's that thought that opens the door to the conditioning that you've been creating all along. Remember, this is not a conscious process. It's no different than ringing a bell and watching a dog salivate. The stimulus is also causing an autonomic, physiological, chemical change that's taking place in the person's body. And that person literally, from a biological standpoint, is back in that event.
Right.
And they're going to behave in almost the same way that they did then because they're trapped in survival, right?
Right, and like you said, that's a snapshot. A lot of people never ended up talking about that event because there's a shameful process there. So it literally stays there.
You're frozen.
You're frozen.
You've stopped, from that point forward, you've stopped evolving. What we're saying is that if you can't overcome that emotion, then you can't create anything new because that emotion is keeping you tacked to the past, right? So then
your whole future is written. Then it's just it's kind
done.
of
Yeah,
it's done.
It's done. You're in a box, right? You're in a box. So what we know, according to functional scans, is that talking about it helps to diminish some of the emotions, but it doesn't really change the brain or body that much. You can talk about it. You can have some insights, but until you begin to make fundamental changes, you're not going to go anywhere. We also know that when a person is in an environment that's remotely familiar to the event, even to the smallest measure where they can associate something, a small little trigger, they're going to have that same emotion consume them, literally consume them. So the problem is not that it's just in the brain, Brian. The problem is it's in the body as well, because it's the emotion that's conditioning the body subconsciously into the past. And now we're 5% conscious mind, 95% subconscious mind. So then that becomes a very profoundly distinct program for that person. So they lose interest in any other thing that is not related to the emotion they're experiencing. In fact, no new information can enter their nervous system that isn't equal to the emotion that they're experiencing because it's not relevant. Right. They're in survival. Survival says, be prepared for what's about ready to happen. Be prepared for the worst. Be ready. Don't let it get you this time. Know what you're going to do, and it's usually, a very primitive reaction.
Right. So you're not present. You're not evolving. You're not open to any new emotions or anything.
Right. So there's been great research done on different energy psychology techniques like EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprogramming. I've seen the scans. People will begin to recall the event and the emotion starts to lose its charge. Now, a memory without the emotional charge is wisdom. Now you're free from your past, right? But it's not the conscious mind that's involved. That the REM movement, the eye movement in EMDR is simulating REM sleep, and you're able to consolidate memories differently that people with trauma sometimes don't dream, or they dream the same dream. EFT, emotional freedom technique, tapping and associating it with certain emotions, kind of like a psychological acupuncture, tends to release energy out of the body, and it lowers cortisol levels significantly. The meditation, a lot of times, when you can give people the proper instruction and set up the conditions in their environment where they feel safe enough, that for me, it's never about the event. The event is incidental. It's about the emotion. Right. So then when you start lowering the volume to that emotion and you teach a person how to get beyond their analytical mind, enter the operating system where those subconscious programs exist, change their brainwaves, and begin to make significant changes. When they start making those subconscious changes, they're less reactionary. You teach them how to find the present moment. You teach them over time the tedium of returning back to the present moment and managing their attention, managing their energy. And you are literally training an animal that has really poor manners. The body's been just conditioned to be like a feral animal that's in survival, but when you start working with it and you keep settling it down, you're breaking that conditioning response and you're telling it it's no longer the mind of anger, that you're the mind. And then this is where David starts slaying Goliath. This is where every time you start doing that, in the beginning it takes a lot of effort and a lot of energy. But if you keep practicing, we have so many brain scans to show so many people healing from anxiety and depression. You can't be anxious if you're in the present moment. You can't be depressed if you're in the present moment. You're in the present moment. You're not thinking about the future or the past, and you start managing that world, then the body that's holding on to that emotion, when it finally gets trained, like training an animal to sit, if you're working with it, sooner or later, if you keep telling it and training it to sit, sooner or later it's going to acquiesce, sooner or later it's going to surrender to another mind. And when that happens, boom, there's this liberation of energy.